In this week's review we're going to take a look at Red Faction, a first-person shooter that was developed by Volition, published by THQ and released on the PS2 in May of 2001. But before we get started, I just wanted to say that if you like this video, please hit the like button as it really does help the channel. If you're looking for more videos like this, then hit the subscribe button, and if you've played this game yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so comment down below. Now, let's move on to the review. Red Faction takes place at some point in a futuristic universe in which space travel is now a common thing for the people of Earth. The character that you control, a man named Parker, has decided he was bored of our planet and made the decision to venture out to the stars for a fresh start, becoming a miner on Mars. He regrets this decision almost immediately as he comes to find that the company that hired him practically treats its employees like slaves. After spending a few weeks being abused by his employer, sharing a bedroom with 8 people and watching his colleagues slowly drop dead from a mysterious plague, he comes to the conclusion that he's had enough, and due to one of the guards being overly aggressive at the end of a shift, he ends up kickstarting a rebellion. As the plot progresses, Parker becomes more and more involved in the fight against the Autor Corporation and traverses all over the Mars facilities, initially just in the hope of finding an escape shuttle back to Earth, but also ends up becoming a bit of a hero in the process, hoping to find a cure for the plague and to put a stop to Autor for good. The story is fairly standard sci-fi action stuff. There aren't really any cutscenes or sections of giant dumps of exposition. Instead, everything is fed to you piece by other rebellion members over the radio and people you meet on your quest, so it's less of a story and more mission objectives baked into the dialogue.
Hey, where do you think you're going?
Leave me alone, jerk. It's been a long day.
It's about to get a little longer, mind scum.
Just let me go, or else.
You threatening me? Yeah, well, threaten this! Stop!
Red Faction is a game that I played a few times back when it first came out, and to the best of my knowledge, I remember having a really good time with it and being impressed with its action and innovative gameplay. What I didn't realise back then, but very quickly realised returning to it 20 years later, was that the game has a formula to its gameplay that is actually very familiar. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it feels a lot like Half-Life. Now, I'm not saying that Volition tried to blatantly copy Valve, more that they may have been inspired by one of the biggest FPS games ever made that came out roughly 3 years earlier. So just like the game that made Valve a household name, Red Faction is a first-person shooter that has elements of platforming, a little bit of puzzle solving, a few sections that take place in vehicles, but the game is mostly shooting people in the face. Is it as good as Half-Life? No, but it still does a good job with what it brings to the table. The game doesn't feature individual missions, it's just one long adventure with some loading points built in, which works in the game's favour because not only does it make the journey to the end feel more natural, but also makes it harder to put down as it never cuts to a loading screen. What also makes it harder to put down is the fact that the game is just plain enjoyable. As a shooter it works really well. There's some auto-aim in play here that helps you a lot, but the moment-to-moment gameplay of getting into firefights with Autor mercenaries is still challenging but a fun time. You can't afford to be too careless, and taking cover and picking your shots is really important, but at the same time the game is just forgiving enough with its health and armor drops that you can afford to let loose from time to time.
Better run, man.
Talking of letting loose, the weapons that Red Faction provides very much allow you to do just that. With more than a dozen weapons to choose from, such as assault rifles, shotguns and flamethrowers, you've got plenty of options no matter the situation. All of them feel great to use, and there's an impact to them that I really appreciate. Where this game really shines, however, is the explosives. So this game came with a little unique feature called geometry modification tech, and that basically means that almost all of the environments are destructible. On the surface that doesn't seem too crazy. Plenty of games have destructible objects and assets, but the way that it comes to play in this game is different. You have stuff like rockets being able to take out chunks of the wall, but the explosives are actually used to help you progress. Through the explosives there are now hidden areas you can now access, or you could even create some dynamic cover for yourself, and if a door is locked you could just blow up the wall next to it and problem solved. This might not seem mind-blowing in 2021, but in 2001 it was a big deal, and one of the reasons I enjoyed this game because I'd spend so many hours just breaking stuff or creating tunnels. Although Red Faction has a lot of good things going on, this doesn't mean that the game is flawless. While the shooting is fun, there is something about the action that becomes repetitive towards the end, and with the sharp difficulty spikes that show up here and there, it can be a bit heartbreaking if you haven't saved the game in a while. Also, while it tries to throw in a bit of platforming and sections and vehicles, there is a clunkiness to the movement that can leave you frustrated. There were a number of times in which I took unnecessary fall damage, or just straight up fell to my death while trying to traverse one of its more tricky sections. There are also moments where the game won't be 100% clear on where you need to go and what you need to do next, which means you could get lost for a period as it really slows down the momentum because an NPC said "follow me" and then ran off when some bad guys burst through the door.
Help! Help! Oh!
In terms of presentation, you can absolutely tell that this game is from 2001, but I wouldn't say it's aged poorly, as I think most of the environments look depressing and devoid of colour, but on purpose, so although that would normally be a negative, the dirty military look to everything just helps sell the vibe a whole lot more. Sometimes I play old games like this and one element of the design stands out drastically more polished than the rest of the game, but with this title that isn't the case. Whether you're talking about the assets in the environment, the character models or weapons, they all look on par with each other, which is to say nothing looks spectacular, but everything looks the same level of good enough. I never saw anything that looked poorly animated, I never saw any distractingly bad textures, and I don't even recall any huge drops in frame rate, so all in all I'd say it certainly performs well in that regard. The audio deserves some compliments too. Although the voiceover is fine but forgettable, the sound of the weapons are powerful, and the explosives along with the crumbling of the environment definitely makes the destruction a little more satisfying. So if I wanted to be really cynical and sort of stupid, I'd say that Red Faction, in my opinion, is just Half-Life but not as good, and you should go play Half-Life instead. If I wanted to be really positive, I'd say that Red Faction is a solid FPS with some good pacing and one fantastic unique feature. My actual opinion lands somewhere in the middle. Are there better games of this formula? Yes, absolutely, but this game brings enough of its own style to the table to be worthy of a purchase. It's not perfect, but it is still one of the better shooters from this generation despite its flaws, and whether you just want to shoot your way through its campaign or burn plenty of hours experimenting with explosives, you'll most likely have a good time.